We're closely monitoring the Gulf for a possible tropical cyclone forming later this week. Is it about to become the next named storm, or nothing more than a rainmaker for the south? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what's going on with this system and if you should be concerned. But first, if you're new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button for more tropical weather updates. So the NHC has, in the latest tropical weather outlook, they have a disturbance with a 20% chance of tropical cyclone formation in the next 7 days for the northern part of the Gulf and the Gulf Coast, extending from Louisiana all the way to Florida. And they're saying a trough of low pressure is located off the Atlantic coast of Florida, and it's forecast to move westward across Florida during the next day or two, and then by late Tuesday, it should enter the northeastern Gulf. As it moves westward, it could potentially try to gradually turn into a tropical cyclone during the middle to the later part of this week. And whether or not it develops, it's expected to produce heavy rainfall and potential flooding across the Gulf Coast. So that's definitely an important storm system to watch. Here's a look at the GFS model on Tropical Tidbits. We have the GFS model showing by tomorrow morning, we have Monday morning, that area of low pressure off the east coast of Florida. Then notice what happens as we go through Monday night into Tuesday. This moves over Florida, bringing in heavy rainfall across Florida as it does so. And then it starts moving westward, it starts trying to organize, and depending on how long it has over water, if it stays further out here, it's definitely going to have a better chance of turning into something than if it stays just right along the coast. It's not necessarily going to be able to organize as well. But going into Wednesday morning, July 16th, you could see it just south of the Florida Panhandle, trying to organize into a tropical system, but then it doesn't really organize very well before going into Thursday. They're showing Wednesday night into early on Thursday. According to the GFS model, this could already be inland around New Orleans or southern Mississippi. So probably not a super great opportunity for a tropical cyclone to form if that happens. According to the GFS model, it does look pretty disorganized. And then going into Thursday evening into Friday, it disappears over the southern U.S. And looking at it on the simulated precipitation view, you could just see a lot of heavy rainfall across the south. Some of it is related to the storms, to this particular storm system, and a lot of it isn't. But it does bring in a lot of heavy rain over Florida, potential flooding. This is on Tuesday. Even going into Wednesday, you start seeing a lot of that rain along the Gulf Coast, but it doesn't really turn into this well-defined tropical cyclone, just a bunch of rain on the GFS. But that rainfall just stays there across the south, even going into next weekend. The AI Euro model actually has this storm system looking slightly better. This is right now. Going into tonight, you have a pretty organized low-pressure trough off the east coast of Florida. This moves over Florida around the same time on Tuesday before it enters the Gulf, and it actually looks like it's organizing pretty well before it moves into Louisiana on Thursday. And it apparently doesn't really have a long time to really organize, but it does try. And environmental conditions are pretty favorable for this to try to do something, but not for it to necessarily rapidly intensify, but it could try to become a tropical system. But even if it doesn't, just the rain is going to be a big issue. Here's a look at the simulated precipitation for the AI Euro model, and it shows that low pressure system east of Florida. Then it crosses over Florida, goes into the Gulf, and tries to become maybe a weak tropical depression. Who knows? Around Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, by the time it reaches Louisiana. And a lot of the models are showing that if it turns into something, it's going to make quote-unquote landfall somewhere around here, somewhere along the coast of Louisiana, southern Mississippi, or southern Alabama, and maybe the Florida Panhandle, but it looks like it's going in this general direction. But of course, it's not even a very organized storm system yet, so trying to predict an exact path is not something that you could really do. The CMC model actually is a bit of a higher end scenario, showing a pretty organized storm system going into tonight. And then it actually really starts to get pretty big over Florida. But then notice it stays very close to the coast. So it really doesn't even get that far offshore, off the coast, before it hits near Mobile, Alabama, maybe Biloxi, Mississippi. So really just very close to the Gulf Coast all along, and then it heads west. But it does look like it's trying to organize pretty quickly, according to the CMC model, but it doesn't really have a lot of time to organize, even though it hits later, apparently, going into late Thursday night into Friday morning. So somewhere between Thursday and Friday, it looks like it might make quote-unquote landfall, if you can even say that for a tropical disturbance. But it doesn't really look like the forecast models are really showing a lot of development with it, but these are global models. They're not giving a high-resolution perspective of hurricane development. They're not really good at that. But it's definitely something to watch, because the sea surface temperatures, it's going to be going over sea surface temperatures in the upper 80s, potentially getting close to 90 degrees. This is over 30 to 32 degrees Celsius in this part of the Gulf where it's going, and these sea surface temperatures are definitely above average. You know, this part of the Gulf is the most above average and the warmest part, according to the latest sea surface temperature analysis. And there's going to be a lot of ocean heat content as well with this, so definitely has potential. Even looking at a sounding, even though the GFS and some of the other models are not really showing it turning into a very, very powerful storm system, just looking at a sounding shows that, yeah, there is some shear. That's going to be a problem, but the moisture is okay. The moisture is not very unfavorable. It's favorable for at least thunderstorm activity and a lot of rain, which it's going to be bringing in a lot of rain. But the shear might be a problem, though. It's not extreme, but it's not what you'd be looking for to see a quickly intensifying tropical system. But the GEFS ensemble model is also showing potential development. You can see the low pressure starting to form off the coast of Florida and the southeast tonight, and that's happening, of course. And then it goes over Florida and then gets into the Gulf, going into Wednesday, into Thursday, and then it starts moving towards Louisiana. And this is actually a similar track to Hurricane Barry back from 2019. So this type of thing can happen. And even Tropical Storm Chantal actually formed quickly from a non-tropical storm system and turned into a quick-forming tropical storm off the coast of the Carolinas. So this is definitely a possibility for this to turn into something, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But whether or not it turns into a tropical depression or a tropical storm or anything like that or not, it's still going to be bringing a lot of rain. And here's the GFS model all the way for the next 5 to 6 days, going all the way through Friday evening. You have a lot of rain over the New Orleans area, seeing possibly almost 2 inches of rain according to this model, and then other parts of Louisiana seeing even over 2 to 3 inches of rain potentially, and then southern Mississippi seeing over 2 to 3 inches, almost 2 to 4 inches of rain. Mobile, Alabama seeing, in that region, seeing around 2 inches. The Florida Panhandle could see over 2 to 4 inches of rain, but the main part of Florida is going to get a lot of rain, especially going into Tuesday. You have areas seeing over 2 to 5 inches of rain. So definitely the Gulf Coast is getting soaked with this storm system, and that can lead to some flooding problems. And here's the day 3 excessive rainfall outlook from the Weather Prediction Center. They're showing a slight risk of flash flooding across the southern part of Florida, including Tampa, including Miami, Cape Coral, Fort Myers, the major parts of central and southern Florida, with a big marginal risk across Florida and even going across the south and the east coast. So some of that is not related to this tropical disturbance, but the heavy rain across South Florida will be related to this storm. And then the day 4 excessive rainfall outlook shows a big marginal risk going all the way from eastern Louisiana all the way to Florida, along where this storm system would be. And this flood risk will go up as we get closer to it. So there's a marginal risk right now, and this could get upgraded to a slight risk, even a moderate risk, maybe in some places, depending on how much rain actually falls. And if there's some thunderstorms, that will definitely produce localized amounts of even heavier rain. And then the day 5 excessive rainfall outlook going into Thursday and Friday shows an even bigger marginal risk going from Louisiana up through Mississippi and Alabama and down into Florida. So definitely a big flooding event. You want to make sure you're paying attention to that if you're across this region, because this storm is going to bring a lot of rain, even if it's not an actual tropical cyclone. There are some favorable factors, but the MJO is not one of them. It's actually, right now, the MJO is highly unfavorable for tropical activity. You have a lot of sinking air happening across the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic. Just like at the beginning of the video, we have this satellite imagery that shows pretty much not a lot of activity happening in either the Eastern Pacific or the Atlantic. So definitely things are pretty quiet except for this disturbance. And then going into July 18th, we have potentially neutral to slightly favorable conditions coming back. And then into July 23rd, it starts looking more favorable, even all the way through the end of July across the Eastern Pacific, but especially the western part of the Atlantic is definitely looking more favorable with the MJO. And then after that, at the beginning of August, it's neutral. Still actually very unfavorable through the whole entire model run over Africa. So maybe not so great for tropical waves moving into the main development region. Not favorable for that for the foreseeable future, according to the CFS. So that's something interesting to notice too. But it is slightly favorable over the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, even going into August. And here's a look at the entire Atlantic with the GFS model. You can see that, yeah, we have our potential storm system along the Gulf Coast, a weak low pressure system. And then other than that, there's not a whole bunch of tropical activity. You notice the intertropical convergence zone is pushed pretty far to the south, and it's not very active with a lot of rain and thunderstorms. You do have some rain hitting the Caribbean from it, of course, and also Central America perhaps, but other than that, really not a whole bunch of tropical activity going into the rest of this week, next week. But there is a lot of frontal activity and a lot of heavy rain that's just going to be storm systems coming into the eastern part of the U.S., especially in the south, bringing in a lot of heavy rain. And that looks like it's going to continue for a while, at least for the next couple weeks, until we could see, with some of these frontal systems, you could have an area of low pressure that kind of separates from that and is able to strengthen into a tropical system in some of these very warm sea surface temperatures. That's going to be a possibility for at least the next couple weeks, but nothing big coming out of the main development region or anything like that through the end of the month, according to the latest forecast models. But all of that rain happening across the Eastern U.S. and the South, that's going to be a way more significant issue than any of the tropical systems. And if there is a tropical system, the big thing is going to be rain and flooding. And so here's a look at the total rainfall on the GFS model for the next 16 days, going all the way into July 29th. And you could see just extreme amounts of rain over most of the U.S. Like the western U.S. is going to see a whole bunch of nothing across California, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. No rain at all. And also South Texas, completely dry. But then you have in Arizona, potentially some areas seeing over 6 inches of rain, even 7 inches of rain over the next couple of weeks. That's incredible. And then anywhere, even further north in Arizona, eastern Arizona, you have potentially 5 to 7 inches of rain. New Mexico seeing several inches in some areas, even extending all the way into Colorado. And some of this is going to be monsoon activity, but that's going to be a massive risk for flooding. And then the eastern part of the U.S. is also seeing several inches of rain, in some areas seeing anywhere from 2 to 5 inches of rain across the Midwest, across the East Coast, seeing a lot of rain, even the south seeing anywhere from about maybe 1 to 2 inches in some of the lighter areas. But some of the areas seeing heavier rain are going to see possibly over 2 to 5 inches of rain over the next couple weeks, and a lot of it could be in the form of thunderstorms. And if you have a thunderstorm, that will definitely bring down a lot heavier rain, and you can see localized rain amounts much higher than this. So definitely a very important thing to pay attention to with all this rain happening, whether or not it's a tropical system happening in the Gulf or not. Definitely the rain is a very important thing to watch. Yeah, so that's pretty much what's happening over the next couple weeks with that. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked this video, please be sure to hit the like button if you haven't already, share the video, and make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications for more weather updates on the tropics. Thanks for watching. Extreme Weather Zone, out.